I'm Jason.
I'm Adam.
And I'm usually Dave from the Digital Soup Podcast.
A proud member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to now.
The opinions expressed are those of each individual. Check out all the other podcasts
at GonnaGeek.com and get ready because geekiness begins in 3,
2,
1.
Welcome back to another episode of the Intellectual Podcast. I'm your host, David Dawson. Thank you so much for joining us once again. It has been a little bit of time since our last episode, and regrettably, we're not going to be getting to the second part of Lauren Schell's interview yet. This is Comic-Con week in San Diego, and as a San Diego-based podcast, we of course have to have a special Comic-Con episode. In today's episode, we interview Neal and Jana Hallford, who are two very cool creatives who live here in San Diego. They do everything from video games to film to radio dramas. And we talk with them about their big new project, the UNCHARTED Regions, which is an audio drama that they're producing, and they've written most of the episodes, and stars Randy Davison, longtime favorite of the Intellectuals and star of our film Forever My Love. And their latest episode that they are going to debut this week at Comic-Con also stars GIGI Edgley. Some of you may remember her from Farscape or from her appearance on the Intellectual Podcast just a couple of years ago. Fantastic what they're doing with Uncharted Regions. And they get into the real heavy details in this interview with Whitney and myself about how they came to create this radio drama. It has taken them a very long time to get to making this. And in fact, many of the scripts, it seems, started their life like decades ago and are now finding their way into production many years down the road. It's a very interesting conversation about the evolution of art and how long it takes sometimes for the creative spark that you have on one day to find its full fruition and life breathed into it, oftentimes many years down the road. We also talk a little bit about Comic-Con, of course. The two of them have been involved in Comic-Con for many years. And Neal and Jana have been running a series of panels at Comic-Con for the last couple of years. And this year they invited the Intellectuals to come on board for a podcasting panel they're calling Heroes at the Mic, which is Thursday, which is tomorrow. Here at Comic-Con in San Diego. It's at the San Diego Library, and it'll be at noon. And I will be sitting on the panel along with many other podcasters who focus on the pop culture and the geek nature of things, much the way I do. We all have kind of different angles that we go at it. Larry Nemechek is very heavily a Star Trek podcast. The Intellectual, of course, is about filmmaking. Each one of the different podcasts that are represented on the panel has a different take on how we approach discussing pop culture and kind of the intricacies of how pop culture is made and brought to audiences. So it'll be a really interesting panel. We're going to be talking about how we podcast, the ins and outs of being a podcaster, and it should be very informative for anybody who's interested in podcasting or has been podcasting for a while and is kind of needing to find a reinvigoration on doing it themselves. So it should be a great panel. I'm very excited to be a part of it. When we started the Intellectual Podcast almost 6 years ago now, we set up a couple sheets of paper and we wrote down a bunch of different things, one of which was a list of interviews we would dream to have on the show, and several of those have come to fruition. And on another sheet, we had a list of things that we hoped we could maybe have happen for us from doing the podcast. And in the top 5 of that was to either host a Comic-Con panel or be on a Comic-Con panel. And thanks to Neal and Jana, we're going to have that opportunity. I'm going to get to sit on my very first Comic-Con panel tomorrow. I'm super excited and very stoked about that. So If you're not in San Diego, there's tons of coverage of Comic-Con online, but be sure you're checking out ixz.us. That's the website for The Intellectual. You can also find it at theintellectual.com. And we'll be posting some videos, man on the street interviews with cosplayers and that sort of stuff. And I believe we will have some special videos from the Intellectual Minis. Those are my nephews who will be doing some interviews and stuff on the streets of Comic-Con tomorrow. Should be a great time, a lot of fun. The videos that we produce at Comic-Con are some of our most popular things that we do during the year. And you should be sure to be checking that out at theintellectual.com or on YouTube at our YouTube channel, which is Intellectual Network. But I think the easiest way to find it is just to visit us online at our website, ixz.us or theintellectual.com. And if you're looking for other things to listen to, if you're driving around and you're just looking for geeky stuff to kind of fill your ear holes with, make sure you're checking out Digital Soup. It's a hilariously geeky podcast. And this week the guys dive into an anatomy book by Batman. They discuss Birds of Prey and Margot Robbie and the first full trailer for Castle Rock, looking all awesome. And after a fun geek off, they talk about companies erasing and eliminating things. Stick a fork in those topics because they're done. You can check them out at digitalsouppodcast.com. Highly recommend it. That's Digital Soup. And now we're going to get into the 221st episode of the Intellectual Podcast. Yes, I know that's out of order, but 220 will be coming next week as we finish off our interview with Lauren Schell. But today, here's episode 221 with Neal and Jana Hallford as they talk about Uncharted Regions, Comic-Con, and the Heroes at the Mic panel. I hope I see you tomorrow at Comic-Con at 12 noon at the San Diego Library for Heroes at the Mic. Here it is, the Intellectual Podcast.
Talk hard and enjoy the mindgasm. The Intellectual Podcast starts now.
It's been a little while since I've had you guys on the show. It's nice to sit down with you guys and catch up again. It's been forever. A couple of years.
Yeah, a couple of years.
Lots and lots has happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, essentially, didn't we just realize that it was a year ago the last time you guys just saw each other?
Yeah.
Not even
to the Comic-Con.
So we ran into each other on the floor there. And, so what have you guys been up to lately?
Of course, last time I think we spoke to you, we had released The Case of Evil. I don't know if we had gone out on festival tour with it yet or not.
I think you had just started the festival run with it at that point.
Okay.
But it was a fantastic movie.
Yeah, well, thank you. That was definitely a labor of love. And again, it was kind of a challenge for us from Miguel Rodriguez of the Horrible Imaginings Film Festival here in town. Of course, now sadly out of town.
Yeah, what's up with that?
He's moving to Santa Ana, I think it is this year. I think it was just the fact that he was
the venue was right.
The venue, he was having some issues with MOPA, I think, and I think he feels that the new venue is a little more open to it. Which I'm all for Miguel being able to move things for the festival or what have you. I'm just sad that San Diego lost one of its best festivals.
Yeah, really.
And so I know that we have another horror film festival here in town. Honestly, I've never been to the other one. Is it a Fantastic Horror Film Festival or something? It's in November or something.
Yeah, I hadn't heard
didn't know about it.
Yeah, there was one. I don't know if there still is. But there was sort of a competing festival in November. But anyhow, but I was very sad to see Miguel take it up the road. But again, for the sake of the festival, it sounded like it was a better deal for them. And so
things have to evolve over time, right?
Yes.
And there's a funny tie-in with McGill for our current project, because what we've been working on lately, the first episode premiered at Horrible Imaginings last fall, the fall of 2017.
You're talking about Uncharted Regions.
Yeah, Uncharted Regions.
Yes.
But so the little short film that we're talking about, The Case of Evil, it and the first episode of this audio drama series we're doing are thematically actually related to each other. They coexist. If there's a shared universe, they actually exist in the same universe.
Oh, that's very cool. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, and so it all is very kind of weird and circular. But we're just, I guess, to kind of give some context to all of this craziness, is that what Jana and I started working on is last year we kind of hit a tough spot with our film making stuff, and we were both kind of hurting for work, and we just hit a position where we needed to pay bills and keep lights on and things like that. And so we had to liquidate about 75% of my film gear.
It's painful, right?
That hurt. I mean, that really, really hurt. But we started talking about, well, what can we do, still creatively do the things that we like to do? And I said, well, I kept most of my audio gear. And so we started kicking around the idea of working on an audio drama series. And where this sort of came from is that many, many years ago, whenever I was just out of high school, I started a audio drama series called UNCHARTED REGIONS at a little tiny radio station that I was working at outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we intermittently did those episodes for a number of years. And before we got done with it, there were a handful of scripts that never got produced before I actually moved out to California. And two of those episodes that were laying around was one called Someday Over You and another one called Haven. And Someday Over You was sort of this weird blues horror kind of thing that we're working on. And so later on, after Jane and I got married, we started working on a web series idea called Scratch, which was kind of based a little bit in that sort of universe. But after we developed it, we ran into the problem of it's going to be a road picture. And there was going to be really hard for us to shoot on a budget, right, as a kind of web scene. So, the way that I kind of described to people, if you ever saw Treme, so Treme, imagine Treme with horror elements introduced into the middle of it.
Which wouldn't be hard because it's New Orleans. It already has that air.
Yeah, and so we came up with the Scratch concept, and then later on when that didn't work out, and we got back around to this idea of let's start producing audio dramas, I picked up this script from that original Uncharted Regions thing and said, we never got this done, let's go ahead and produce this. And sort of weirdly enough is that there was Someday Over You, which inspired Scratch, which turned into The Case of Evil along the way, or at least parts of that became Case of Evil. And then now we're back to producing Someday Over You, which was the original idea that started all this other stuff. So both of those things kind of coexist in the same universe.
Gotcha.
You very literally came full circle.
Yeah, I very literally came full circle.
I tease Neal about, I've said this before, but I tease Neal about being his own intern because he's collaborated with his late teens, early 20s self with some of the scripts for this. But with Scratch, the only reason we didn't do it was because it would be a road picture. It would need a cast with specific skills and specific looks, etc. And so there was no way we could do that on a shoestring. But we thought, well, we could do a piece of it. So if we were to do Scratch, that would be a contemporary blues horror thing, but there would be flashbacks,
right,
showing backstories of things, etc. So when we did The Case of Evil, that was like a little one of the flashback things. What was one of the things that there would probably be scenes like that peppered through Scratch if we did that contemporary piece. And so, but it was actually the Someday Over You that started it all. So there's something very, as one person said, very timey-wimey about it all. But it's been fun, and it's nice to see these things finally get realized. And then we also have new things coming out too. And
of course, another timey-wimey thing about it is the fact that Miguel debuted The Case of Evil for us.
Right.
And so this last fall, he opened his film festival with our first pilot episode, Someday Over You, at the Horrible Imagining Film Festival.
Now, how did you handle that? Because I heard that you put like a package together so that there was some sort of video component.
Yeah, whenever Miguel asked, we actually approached him with the idea of not necessarily having it be a big thing as a part of the main program. Mm-hmm. Because I said, well, it's kind of wacky kind of thing, but having an audio thing at a film festival. So I'd actually suggested, I said, well, you've got this big dinner time slot, in between films. So my initial pitch to him was, we'll bring in we'll bring in the episode, and we can just have it playing on speakers in the area where people are eating dinner or lunch or what have you. So that way it's not taking away from other films and all the other things, and you don't need a screen, you don't need all this other stuff. And Miguel says, well, the only thing is I think that's a terrible idea. And he said the reason that is that number one, during dinner time, people are going to be talking to each other and everything else, and they're going to completely miss what you're trying to do.
Well, God bless Miguel for that, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
he was right.
I think he really is very supportive.
He very much wants people to ingest and appreciate, not just have it on in the background. Like,
yeah. Miguel's been a gigantic supporter of all ours, basically for all the years that we've known him. And his bottom line was doing what was best for what we were working on.
Right.
And so what he decided, as we were kind of kicking around ideas, the one thing he said, well, we're at a film festival, so it should have some kind of visual component to it. And I said, okay, well, we've got we're working on getting the episode recorded and everything, but I said
there wasn't much notice.
There was. Well, I mean, we had about between whenever I finished the initial mix of the episode and whenever the film festival was going to be, I had 3 days between finishing initial mix on the audio and trying to come up with something. So I was literally didn't sleep for 3 days. And I spent all this time coming up with, it was kind of like, I don't know, a PowerPoint on steroids kind of thing.
Right.
And so I came with like little looping animations and some other stuff that I put together. And it wasn't terrible, but people who come to a film festival for a visual aspect would have, I think, been vastly disappointed in what I put up on the screen, because I slapped together in 3 days,
right,
with no sleep. And so, I mean, it kind of added something to it. But I then just ripped. I said, here's a DVD, here's a CD, because I'm paranoid, because I've actually been to other film festivals where everything went wrong imaginable. And so I said, every format that I can bring it on. So here's it on CD, here's on DVD, here's it on Blu-ray. Take the one that works, whichever one works. And so they were actually having some issue with getting the Blu-ray to play. And so he said, you know what? I'm just going to we're just going to go in, turn all the lights off, and let people sit down and listen to this and kind of experience this like they were just in their living room with a radio. And I said, well, that's what it was designed
and the
for.
MOPA Theater is like beautiful for that, right?
It's
got that star field in the.
It had a little bit of the star field going, and it was
which actually. Yeah, go ahead.
I just remember thinking that Neal and I were both a little apprehensive, thinking, okay, everybody's paid to come to a film festival and they get to sit in the dark and listen. But it was wonderful. It was a big surprise how people responded.
Well, first of all, they actually changed the schedule for the festival. So they actually extended out the beginning. So we were the first thing at the festival. Mm-hmm. So people come in, they turn down the lights and say, we're going to do this weird, kind of old timey kind of thing. And so you couldn't have heard a pin drop in there. Everyone was just focused and listening. And we were really surprised by that, because, a lot of people aren't going to be expecting this when they come to this festival. But then after it was over with, we actually had more response from the audience at that for that than we did for Case of Evil. And we had people come by from the opera and say, man, this is amazing, blah, 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 blah. And so
having listened to the episode, it's fantastically well produced.
Thank you.
And the performances are, top notch. It reminded me of listening to radio plays and stuff when I was a kid with my dad, because we used to do a lot of driving, because my parents got divorced and we drove all over the place.
Yeah, the visitation trip.
To do the visits, right?
Yes, right.
And those late night travels, my dad and I would turn on the radio and we would listen to, The Shadow and classics like that. And sitting and listening to Uncharted Regions, it's exactly what I was feeling. I was feeling that wonderful sensation of how it was when I was with my dad in the car late at night together, listening to these fantastic, mysteries and these wonderful stories. It was wonderfhe done. So I think it's great that they didn't do the visuals.
Well, I am too.
That worked out
because I think it actually would have been distracting, and he said, because this is a very specifically designed experience, then adding this other kind of tacked on thing. If we had spent as much time developing the video portion as the audio portion, we might have been able to do something really amazing.
And I actually think that first one, Someday Over You, might work well as a stage play. If you did like one of those real simple sets where the same basic, boxy things double as different sets, and then the flashback scenes could be up like kind of in a balcony or whatever. And so I think that would actually work as that. I remember when Neal was editing our film, The Case of Evil, and when something's being edited, you hear the dialogue again and again, many times, little pieces of the same dialogue. So I got to listen to that a lot while Neal was editing that. And I made the comment to him that other than a couple of things, like at the very beginning and another crucial scene, the whole thing carried very, very well as an audio drama. Because, I wouldn't be seeing his computer screen. I'd be doing other things in the house or working on other projects. So we talked about that. So later when we had, as Neal mentioned, some tough times and found ourselves with considerably less equipment to work with, I said, well, we can still tell stories. We'll just do them another way. And so it is really wonderful to not be fettered with budgets for locations and costumes. And, if you need another planet or to go back in time or forward into the future, it's a lot simpler when you're doing audio.
I mean, there's still sound libraries got to buy, but it's a lot easier than building sets and doing makeup and CG and all that stuff.
Believe me, I had no idea when we were starting out how things like sound libraries could add up. So this idea of doing something cheaper, in
the long run, it would be cheaper because the one thing we keep in mind, Case of Evil or The Case of Evil, people keep on dropping off our friends and say, we're the definitive article, The Case of Evil, not A Case of Evil. So it's not like I've come down with a case of evil. No,
it's TCOE, not CO.
TCOE, yes. I say that. The Case of Evil. But the one thing about doing The Case of Evil, it's only actually about 11 minutes long. Once you add on the credits. But once we're done, because our first season of Uncharted Regions that we're working on, it's going to be 13 episodes long. It's 6.5 hours of tape.
It's a lot of content.
That's a lot of content.
Yeah.
And so that's sound effects, music, the whole 9 yards. And so I said, I'm producing a television series here for all intents and purposes.
And because
I've just done that myself.
Yeah.
And
just did a 7-episode docuseries. It's a lot more.
Plus, it's an anthology series. If you do a series that's going to be in the same world with most of the same characters, then you can have your basic sets and library and all that. And so when you're doing an anthology series, whether it's television, film, or radio or audio, there's more sound libraries, there's more sound effects, etc., that are needed. But it's been really, really fun working with the different people involved, and I must say we do have a lot of fun at our recording sessions.
And Someday Over You, I was a little bit nervous at the beginning because one of the big parts of Someday Over You, which is unique to the series, is that, of course, it heavily revolves around music. It has a main character that is a singer. And I said, I need someone who can sound like an old-time blues singer. And then on top of this, I have to write a song that sounds like an old 20s music tune. And at that point, I am a musician, but I hadn't written anything in 20 years. And particularly hadn't been writing blues tunes when I was writing anything. I'm a child of the 80s. You need stuff that sounds like Erasure or Depeche Mode, and that sort of was my natural.
Yeah, the blues is a very particular sound.
It's a very particular kind of sound. And so, electronic, very highly quantized kind of stuff, but you're doing this old 20s stuff that's very loose and it's very fluid. It's got to have a kind of flow to it. So to bite that one off is our first episode. Actually, I kind of go, what am I doing? But
isn't that oftentimes when you find yourself standing back going, oh God, what did I get myself into? Isn't that usually like a good sign that you're on the right track?
Well, I think
that's what I've discovered for me.
Well, the thing that whenever Jane and I were talking about, so like I said, I had 2 scripts left over from that original series that had not been produced. So there's Someday Over You and another one called Haven. And so I think Someday Over You was something that, because it kept on being the mine of different things to come for. So like I say, it produced Scratch, it produced The Case of Evil. I felt like I had to go back and get this thing done because it's been burning in the back of my head for all of these years. I said, I have to get this one done. And like I say, it scared the bejesus out of me whenever I first got started with it. And because we had no idea who we were going to have play this particular part. And then we did our auditions for Someday Over You. And we got a really good response, which was particularly since really only a handful of people really kind of know us around town. You know, we don't get involved with the 48 and we don't do
you keep a pretty low profile.
So we kind of keep a pretty low profile. So there's a little tiny pool of people who knew us. And so for a lot of other people, they go, who are these weird random people that are sticking radio drama ads in the film, groups here in town? And
for which a lot of people send us headshots. I still haven't.
That's the funniest thing to me.
It's just a habit of doing that.
Here's my reel, here's my headshots, and everything else like that. And so I said, okay, that's all very fine and good, but first of all, you need to know we're an audio drama series, and so other than publicity, we can't use your headshot, but that's okay.
Yeah. I know I've asked you for the sides, like both times you've gone out for auditions and stuff, and then I look at the dates that you're like planning on recording, and I'm always out of town. I'm like, damn it!
And actually,
I keep like holding off on actually like really auditioning.
And actually, headshots are not entirely bad, because for some of the things we have coming up, there are specific things like we're going to need Japanese or at least Asian actors for one thing that we're doing, and some other similar things. So when we're looking for people from specific communities or groups, I think a headshot's not a bad thing to say. Yes, I'm in this club.
Like nobody knows that I'm half Filipino if they just look at my name, right? Mm-hmm. So I got into the second year of the San Diego Asian Film Festival, and when I met Leanne Kim at a lunch, she goes, "You're David Dawson. Oh, thank God." She's like, we just kind of took it on faith that somebody was Asian. I was like, yeah.
It's hard to tell sometimes, like with Tiger Woods,
right? Well, you would never know.
And for us, obviously we don't have people that because we're doing purely audio. Isn't necessarily always an issue of what race particular are, but we have some cases where, like for our blues episode, he said this has to do with Black history, and I think it is disingenuous. He said we want to have an African American actor playing these particular parts,
right?
And then another, one of the ones that Jana was mentioning is we have an upcoming episode where we're going to actually go into one of the Japanese relocation camps during World War II. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to have anybody other than Japanese people of Japanese extraction playing the people in the camp, because this is part of their history, and I want to make sure that they are comfortable with this, but also so that they know they're truly being represented here.
Like it's absolutely George Takei's history.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we kind of want to talk to his people.
Yeah,
I have people that know his people. So, and of course, we've actually interviewed George ourselves, but we will probably take a slightly different route with this one.
So that's a question I have for some of your larger acting talent. How do you find them? How do you even get? Because you have GIGI Edgley in your next These Haunted Hills.
Yes,
who's also been on the podcast.
How did you get in contact with her?
Well, we stalked her. No.
It was a combination of things. She actually knew us on site from conventions over the years. She is very friendly. Plus, we have a couple of friends that had worked on projects with her, including our friends at Runic Films, who have a short film coming out with her, I hope very soon. # Yes. And so
she's just a lovely person.
Oh, she is. And that was the other thing, is whether somebody is known or unknown, we want to work with people that are fun to work with, easy to work with. We like having a very pleasant set or recording, together, whether we're filming or doing audio drama. And we'd heard nothing but good things about her. And in fact, her role in These Haunted Hills was tailored to her. We had actually, that script came out of a concept we'd had a while back for a television series called Dust, which is set on a very newly terraformed Mars. So we had a character called Alice who was from Australia, but she was a little older and more eccentric than our character for these haunted hills. But when we were looking at doing this audio series, Neal said, I want to talk to Gigi and see if she would be willing to work with us on this. And she was wonderful. We had so much fun in that recording, and she's a wonderful actress. We really, really enjoyed it. And just the play between the different actors and characters was really great. That was so much fun.
Yeah, we definitely wrote this episode with her voice in mind, and so I was just a little bit nervous whenever I first sent her the script because I had no idea how she was going to respond to it.
Right.
And then I sent it to her, and the next day I got an email back. She said, "Great, when are we doing this?" But she, the thing I love about Gigi is she is so positive, and she just says, "Look, I love great stories. I love to kind of help make things happen." And so she was just hopping up and down and saying, "In whatever way that I can be involved with this and help you with this, I'd love to do that." And
that's fantastic. So
she, again, you've had her on the podcast, you know what she's like, and she's a sweetheart. And
she was one of those ones. I don't get starstruck very much when I do the show. There's only been a couple of times, but Gigi was definitely one of those ones where like I walked into it and I was nervous, and it took 2 minutes of talking to her to just calm down, because she's so lovely.
She's very real and very down to earth kind of person,
and not a disappointment at all.
No,
not
in the least.
It was quite the opposite. You end up liking her even more after you've met her in person. So that was a great thing.
Talk a little bit about some of our other folks that we have in this particular episode. Of course, obviously one of the other people that we have in the story was Mr. Randy Davison. And he's one of our local San Diego indie film star folks or whatever.
And the star of my film Forever My Love.
Yeah,
and a great guy. Great guy.
Yeah.
And but Randy is just a great guy. He's a colossal geek, which is one of the reasons that we love him.
And a big asset to Uncharted Regions, because besides starring with and co-starring in this latest episode, he had a small part in a previous one in Someday.
He had a part in Someday, yeah.
And also, and he'll be in some other things down the road, but. He's helped us when we had table reads for other things, really just kind of naturally started helping and coaching some of the newer, younger actors and all. He's been a really great guy. He's going to be, I believe, associated with pretty much everything we do one way or the other if we can help it.
He's probably the closest thing we have to a permanent actor in the series. He's going to be one of those people we kind of keep reaching for. He actually is someone who really loves voice acting.
Yeah,
it's just something that's really important.
He has so many character voices and accents he can do. It's ridiculous.
And what he brought to this one, the way he and Gigi's characters are very different personalities. The way they play off against each other works out very well.
Wonderful.
Works out very, very well.
Just something magical when two actors find the voice with each other.
And then our youngest featured performer in this featured one is Tamara, and she's wonderful, and she plays a 13 or 14-year-old girl, which she's exactly right for that part, and she worked very well with Gigi in this as well. And then our youngest cast member we needed the voice of a little Gigi Edgley. Her character is a small girl with her father, and so
that went to forever.
Yes, we thought, okay, this is Southern California. I've met Australians here. Somebody that acts, we've met actors from Australia. We thought somebody's got a little girl that could be this, this child version of GIGI Edgley's character. And we couldn't find anyone. Finally, Neal located online a woman who's a voice actress whose daughter did a beautiful job with the part. So that was Mary Grace.
Mary Grace Gregg.
Yes, and she's a wonderful actress, and her mother did a real good job with coaching and directing her. And so they gave us so many takes on everything. There was just this huge array of things to choose from.
Really super grateful for that, because with everybody else, Mary Grace and also Joe Paulson, who was another of the actors that we had in this. I got to know him because he was in Jim Phillips' Life-O-Matic. I don't know if you saw that or whatever, but he was in that. And so I got to know Joe. And when we were coming down to think about the part of the father, I just go, he would be perfect. He has exactly the right voice, the right demeanor, and he just totally nailed that part. But
that was fun coordinating.
Joe was not going to be available the weekend that we had GIGI in the booth, and I am a big believer, particularly for something like this, is you want to get everybody in the booth at the same time, because the actors all get the juice off of each other.
Right.
But we were just kind of figuring, look, the other scenes, those characters are acting together in the same moment. And for Joe and Mary Grace didn't interact with the others. But unfortunately, that's why, like I said, Mary Grace was in Australia. He was here. So we said, we'll have two different recording sessions. So GIGI and Randy and Tamara were all in the booth together. We recorded at our friend Harris Orkin's studio up in LA, Double R Studios. Great folks.
And our engineer is great.
And Andrew. Mm-hmm. And Harris also wrote and produced one of the episodes for us, Trail of Fears.
Okay.
And so really great guy, another guy from the game industry, like myself. Anyhow, so we had the recording session at Los Angeles at Harris's studio, and then we had Mary do her lines in Australia first, and then I took all of her crazy takes and assembled her part, then brought it down to record in Escondido at what's
Chelsea
it called?
Studio.
What?
I don't know. Chelsea Studio.
Second Story Studios in Escondido. And so anyway, so we brought her takes in, and then Joe was able to do his off of her takes.
Gotcha.
And then I brought all that stuff into my edit suite and turned it into confetti. And so these actors have no idea what I do to them. They really don't.
It was starting to remind me.
They never do.
It was starting to remind me almost of some of those old comedy routines. I think there was something like that on the original I Love Lucy, where there's a whole line of people that they need somebody to translate from one language to the other, but nobody can do it directly. So they have a whole line of people of, the person that speaks German speaks to the person who speaks Spanish and German who speaks to,
It was starting with the horse on my head? What?
It was starting to feel like that with all these recording things. But when we were in the studio, GIGI and Randy actually read, when they were done with the other things, they read the flashback part between the father and daughter. And they did such a beautiful job. And it really showed, I wish people could have heard in some ways, because the acting there, the way GIGI, a grown woman, just turns into a little girl. And I thought, oh gosh, she remembers what it's like to be a kid.
I'm going to put that on my Patreon.
You should.
So that folks can hear that particular take. But before we sent it off to Mary Grace or to Joe, I sent them and said, so you have an idea of what I want this interaction to feel like. And also so you have an idea for what GIGI is like, so when you have to play younger GIGI, what I'm shooting for. And so, but oh my gosh, the scene that they do together is just, it kicks my ass.
Oh yeah, the actual actors, Mary Grace and Joe, they made it their own.
Yeah.
But they got the spirit of what had been modeled for them, but they made it their own and did such a beautiful job.
Yeah. If they're their own, each one is their own special thing. But both of them are just fantastic. But just for obvious reasons, I couldn't have GIGI be younger her.
So now you're going to have a bunch of these folks at your panel on Saturday, correct?
On Friday. Friday at 3 p.m. the Neal Morgan Auditorium in the San Diego Public Library.
And now are the folks who come to that going to get to hear a bit of the
We are
show?
playing the entire episode.
Ooh. Is it
and
going to be in a darkened room like it was?
Well, we want to do that.
That'd be
In as
great.
much as we're able to. Of course, the thing about the Neal Morgan Auditorium, as I recall, the whole back thing is glass windows. So I'm hoping maybe we can at least maybe have shutters down or something to darken it. Because I really love that effect whenever we did it at Horrible, because it really does kind of help you slide.
I think it gets back to like the classic campfire stories, right?
Yeah.
Like there's something in our DNA, I think, about a dark room or a dark space.
Yeah.
Subtly lit.
And being told a story.
I think it keeps you from being distracted by visual things, making you start thinking about other stuff. You can concentrate on the voices and the sound effects and the music.
Yeah.
Oh, and it is, I think you're right, it is very deep in people. I mean, even what religion isn't in some way based on sacred stories.
Yeah.
It's a very deep
I got to
thing.
spend a little bit of time on Navajo Nation a couple years back researching for a film. And one night we went out and got to hear the creation story for the Navajos. In Navajo, being told around campfires, and I had an interpreter interpreting for me as we listened, but it was just this like magical thing to be there and listening to that, like on the land and by the fire. Like there's something primal about it, and just it felt like this is the only way I should be here.
I'd set a fire in the middle of the auditorium, but somehow I think
Probably wouldn't work out so great. It would be great if this started a trend, because you think of radio dramas back in the 50s. You'd sit in front and have just the family, 5 or 6 people maybe, but to have an entire room of people having the communal experience like you would with a film with the audio, it's a really fascinating sociological experiment. Can you guys quietly listen?
Well,
okay.
That's one thing that I actually thought was actually really wonderful about what happened at Horrible Imaginings, and something that actually I thought about more whenever we went to go see that one where you don't make any sounds.
Quiet Place.
Quiet Place. And the fact that, it's so much easier during a regular movie for people to turn around and talk to each other. Because, they can talk to each other, but they can still kind of experience the movie. But in that movie was, that theater was dead quiet. Because first of all, anyone's going to hear the slightest sound you're going to make. But also, too, is that it is all visual. And you can't experience it. And the flip side of the coin is that when we have something like this is, you're going to miss everything if you talk to each other.
Right.
And so it really is truly turn everything else off and concentrate on what's going on with the dialogue and the sound effects.
And what time is that panel?
That time is at 3 p.m.
3 p.m. on Friday at the library.
The library.
And I think you're right about, this being a fun way for people to experience something, because obviously we have television and film where you have visual stuff, and then you have visual imagery everywhere. But normally when you are taking in a story and making your own pictures in your head, you're reading. And if people are listening and they can just kind of rest their eyes and take it in, but do it, it's fun in a theater setting to experience that. And of course, it's fun for us to see people's reaction and, the relief you get when people only laugh when there's something funny and things like that. It is very special.
And Whitney's got a bunch of questions.
Oh, I have so many questions.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But before, just because we were talking about, the idea of being read to and how it sort of focuses the imagination, I wonder if that's a trigger back to childhood, because you think people used to read to you and you didn't know how to read yet, so it didn't really matter what the words were, but you could just sort of see the pictures, and I don't know if it frees up a certain space in the imagination where it's okay. Anyway, my thought there. My other many questions, so many questions. You guys mentioned earlier that you guys are pretty low key in the community. I've met you guys a couple of times, but I didn't really know a whole lot about you. And then as we're talking, you guys keep on dropping these little things. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I wish I knew more about that or that. So what was your journey? Where did you guys come from? How did you make it to California? How did you get in this industry? Why did you get in this industry? Et cetera, et cetera.
Oh dear.
It's a long discussion.
I don't know if you guys maybe went over this the last time you were on the show.
A little bit.
but-
We covered it a little
We
bit.
kind of covered a little bit, but
There was a lot of voices
you weren't,
last time.
There were a lot of voices last time, but that's all right. So Jana, do you want to talk about your end of things first, or?
Okay. Well, I grew up in a household that actually the one we're recording right now, I grew up in a household where we didn't always have a working television set, but we had like 3 sets of encyclopedias and music and dance lessons. And we would hold these family meetings and occasionally discuss whether or not we should get the TV fixed or get another one. But we always voted to do something else. Like people wanted to go to music camp or wanted to keep having various lessons and wanted books, etc. So I grew up I'm definitely less perfectly enculturated than a lot of my peers, but grew up with a lot of imagination, making pictures in my mind when I made up stories or read. And so that very much was my background. I did a lot of writing in high school, but in college I ended up majoring in professional track visual arts. And so I was a painting and drawing emphasis major, but my senior thesis show was actually in collage. And so something that I really realized in college is whatever I did, whatever I went, I wanted to be around creative people. And so happily I've managed to do that. And so anyway, I ended up doing a lot of writing professionally, and then later doing writing in event stuff like trade shows. But I always kept a hand in creative things and have been in juried art shows and such. And when I met Neal, we were actually both, this was when most people didn't even meet online, but it was the kind of pre-internet days of America Online. And there was a writer's chat room for people that wrote or wanted to write. And so the Night Writers chat it's amazing I ever met anybody to talk to, because with all these writers typing fast and flirting and self-promoting and everything, the screen would on Saturday nights, Friday or Saturday nights, it was dizzying how that screen would scroll.
Fast, man.
It would scroll like crazy.
You had to learn to speed read as well as speed type.
But anyway, Neal and I made friends on the writers chat, and then later got together and got involved and got married. But one of the things I liked about Neal was that he was a creative person that wanted to live a creative life and know creative people, and so.
Or as I call them, weirdos.
Yeah, and. Yeah, in fact, when we met, Neal was being blatantly self-promotional. I had just been asked to write a story or two and do an interview or two for the old Starlog magazine. And so when he found that out, because,
Which, just to interject for just a second, back in the day before the internet, there was Starlog.
Starlog was huge.
And that was where you got all your information about anything geeky going on. So for younger folks, just so you have context for what that means. So
yes. And so anyway, very important. And so anyway, that's where we met. And even though the interview stuff never fully got carried out, and I didn't do an interview with Neal, I still got to know him.
Yeah. I was at the time. So we'll kind of loop through my stuff. 13 years old. Got interested into filmmaking because I run across a magazine called Cinemagic, which was a magazine so that people could make science fiction and fantasy movies in their backyards. And so it was oriented to folks who had like Super 8 cameras and all this kind of stuff. So got really fascinated in filmmaking. That's what I wanted to do in college. And then I went to apply in college and realized this is way the hell too expensive for me to do, because back in the day, film was film, literally film. And so you had to have the money to process the film, to buy the film and everything else. And as a college student, that was a lot of money. Both my parents were school teachers. We didn't have a lot. And so I decided to go into radio production, because between high school and me applying for college, I'd worked for a number of years for this little tiny radio station in my hometown, which had
What was your hometown?
My hometown is Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I live actually. There's a little town just outside of called Sand Springs, which is actually, I lived right on the border. So I've always kind of lived at the intersection of places. My home address was Tulsa. My school system was Sand Springs. My street was the dividing line between Tulsa, Oklahoma and Osage County. So, Osage County, August. So my street was the dividing line between those two counties. If a house caught on fire on our street, we had to determine which side of the street it was on because a different fire department would respond depending on which side of the street it was.
That's amazing.
Anyway, so I worked in this little tiny country in Western radio station, and so they played really, really old countries. We always refer to it as Stone Age country. And it was there that we had started, my buddy and I had started the first iteration of Uncharted Regions.
What time was that? What year was that?
Okay, this is 1984. The first iteration of the starts in 84.
The reason I ask is because both my cousin and my brother-in-law grew up in Broken Arrow.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yep.
So, whatever you were doing on radio around that time, they potentially were listening.
They potentially could have been listening if they really liked really old country. Also, too, is that potentially people out here could have heard us at night, because at night we had a clear channel station. Oh. So at night, what that means is basically at night that we had a license to essentially triple the broadcast range of our station. And so we would have people, we could reach people out here in California sometimes if the weather was just right. And under ordinary circumstances, we were hitting Texas, we were hitting New Mexico. And so I usually got to work the night shift, which was kind of fun, because I'd be getting, requests from our truckers and stuff, say, hey, can you play whatever? I said, okay, well, let me go see if I, unearth the mummy and see if I still have the record somewhere. But anyway, so that's where the first iteration of Uncharted Regions came along. And so I went out to college, as I said. Film was too expensive, even though it was something what I really wanted to do. So I decided to concentrate on radio, because all I needed for one semester was one blank magnetic tape, which I could record over whenever I needed to do my next assignment. So of all of the RTF, radio, television, film production track stuff to do, was the cheapest thing to do. So that's what my degree is actually in, is radio, television, film production, but most of the experience is there with the radio stuff. Then I take a really weird turn, because I graduate from college. I'm looking around for a small radio station to go work at, probably news production or something else like that, because that was the main thrust of what I worked in. And my buddy calls me up and says, hey, I just got a job as an illustrator for a computer game company. Do you want to come work as an illustrator for a computer game company? And I said, okay, dude, you've taught me some stuff about doing this stuff, because I was kind of into, airbrush, nebulas and planets and that kind of stuff. And I said, I can come do that for you, but it'll take me 3 months to do what you can do in a couple of days, and it still won't be as good as what you're doing. So what's ultimately going to happen, I'm going to come out there, they're going to decide that my work is crap, and they're going to fire me, and I'm going to be stuck in California with no job. And so I said, let's not do that. And I said, okay, whatever. So then he calls me back 6 months later, and he says, okay, we need a writer. And again, basically your job is writing science fiction and fantasy on a salary. And do you want to do that? Okay, now sold. You're in my.
And what were your writing samples?
My writing samples were the scripts I wrote for Uncharted Regions.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And so that's how I got into the game industry, and that's what is still what I actually make money doing. Is working for the computer gaming industry.
So what game storylines have you written?
Most of this is old stuff, dear, but worked on the Might and Magic series. So I worked on Might and Magic #3. The one after that is the one that everybody screams about. It was a game called Betrayal at Krondor. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the fantasy author Raymond E. Feist. But I adapted his universe for gaming. And that one went on to win crazy numbers of awards. We were best best game of the year, blah, 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 Computer Game World.
You still get fan mail.
I still get fan mail 30 years later for
awesome.
making that game or whatever.
25 or whatever years.
25 or whatever. But and that's still probably the one I'm most proud of, the one I spent the longest on, and the one that I literally almost killed myself doing, because I went in the hospital right before the ending of that thing because I was basically suffering from exhaustion, and the doctor actually made me stay home for a week from work. But anyway, after that, Dungeon Siege, Champions of Norath. I was lead designer on a RTS called Lords of EverQuest, which was based on, the MMO of the same name. And so the past several years, I've just been sort of like, the Johnny for hire. If you need somebody to write dialogue or whatever, that's sort of what I do these days. So, then we kind of fast forward to 2007. The economy tanks, and I'm having a hard time finding game work. And at the same time, my buddy of mine, Jimmy Diggs, who you've met, I think.
I think so.
Jimmy was a writer on Star Trek Deep Space Nine and on Voyager, and we became buds here. And so we started to go into the San Diego Filmmakers group. And I got really excited because I was seeing people were using Panasonic, individual home cameras and making some stuff that looked really amazing. Some was, good as anything you'd see on screen. And then Jane and I slowly kind of slipped into the whole indie film stuff.
Right.
We made some documentary type films, and we did some basically commercials for different charities or fundraisers. We've done some stuff for the American Cancer Society and for some fundraisers that were benefiting that. So we eased into filmmaking that way, and we didn't realize what a great film community there was here in San Diego. We've met some fabulous people, and who knew it was that collaborative? I mean, Neal had worked in games for years, and we'd gone to game meetings and all, and it's among film people, it's very different. I mean, people say, "Oh, what are you doing? Can I come help?"
Right.
And that's just hopping up and down. Please, please, please. Yeah.
And I mean, then we'd be filming something, and we'd just be doing basic things like I'd be feeding people, and people would be so grateful that they were getting fed. And it's like, well, that's the very least we can do. But a wonderful film community here, and something that I was thinking about, because obviously Neal and I have been working on things in various ways for years now. Is about 8 years ago, a friend of ours that was coming out from England for a fan convention in Los Angeles wanted us to meet her there. So we mostly went because of her. But it was really nice because there were other people there, like Linda Hamilton, and John Noble was one of the people that was appearing. And so we went to hear him speak. And he talked about how it was a wonderful thing to hear, at midlife. He was, because, obviously he's a little older than us, but he was talking about how a lot of things that happened in his life, projects that maybe didn't go anywhere or sort of fizzed out before they could. It was like at some point the threads started to weave together. And, that was how he got his part of Walter on that show that I watched. Fringe, yes, on Fringe, yes, and that he got that part because of something else he'd done that wasn't,
he'd worked for JJ's dad
on something, and was particularly remembered for something that actually hadn't gone anywhere or gone very far. And so he talked for a bit about some things that you do in life that don't seem to go anywhere. They're not really wasted. And that was such a nice thing to hear because, I think a lot of us have had, like a sidetrack creative project or some dream project that we just didn't have the resources to do. And so hearing that was really nice. And I've thought about that several times as we've worked on things here in the San Diego film community, and especially doing this audio drama because, things in Neal's life, the storytelling, the audio work, all this stuff, coming together. And I think that's nice.
The game stuff. Because, I really learned about the production chain while I was working in game production. Because game production and film production aren't that different. Because you still have the same basic, this has to get done before this gets done. You understand basically about making sure you keep that
line producing.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Keep it going.
I noticed that when Neal and I were first getting to know each other before we'd even met in person, he was trying to explain to me about, film, about game production and design documents and stuff like that. And having worked for a book publishing company for 5 or 6 years, I said, oh, that's publishing. Yeah, this is there's a lot of parallels, and it's the same thing with production work. No matter whether it's audio or film, it's very similar. And so if you know how to do one thing, it's good for another. And that's why I also want to say, I sometimes, maybe it's a generational thing, maybe it's just people that are my age that are older, but when I was younger, a lot of people were very disparaging about commercial work people did. Oh, don't go write for a corporation. You sell out or whatever. Well, that's not true. Doing marketing writing, I learned to write to a deadline. Right. I've been the voice of several CEOs. So later, when our first Swords and Circuitry production, Neal had...
It was not a film.
Yeah, he was a book. Neal had written the most entertaining book proposal I'd ever seen, got a book contract for a book about the creative side of computer games, and called Swords and Circuitry, a designer's guide to computer role-playing games. But it's really about the creative aspect of putting together a game. And then he got all this, he'd been looking for work, and then he got game work that he had to do.
I got the Dungeon Siege contract the same time I was working on the book.
So he's trying to juggle game design and writing about it. And so the publisher was starting to get a little antsy about deadlines and all. And I said to him, before they assign you someone, how about me? I've been the voice of different CEOs. If I've heard someone speak, I can write like they're them. Right. But anyway, so that's how I ended up helping him with the book, and it stayed in his voice, and you can't tell who's who. But anyway, that's my little tangent here. But what I'm trying to say is, if people need to do other things to support themselves, that's not a bad thing. You can still, if you're determined, apply it to creative things.
Just adds to your toolbox.
Yeah, there's a couple of different things. We're the sum of our parts, right?
Yes.
We're some of our experiences. Every experience you have educates the next experience, and so on and so forth down the line. But like, I've heard a lot of filmmakers say, oh, this is all I can do, it's all I know. But filmmaking is such a multifaceted thing. And I dovetailed it for 3 years into running a programming company. Like, I made iPhone apps and stuff.
Right.
Sure, and
then eventually we started making products in China, and I was dealing with Chinese manufacturing. I have no business degree, but I took a company public. I created all these products, and eventually learned how to cope with importing products from China and tariffs and all the rest because of my filming background. Like I've done all these other things to make films come to life. Like, it's the same thing to do.
Making stuff is making stuff.
Making stuff is making stuff.
And delivering something
hitting
finished.
Deadlines.
Yes. Using your resources
putting
wisely.
Something together people will enjoy. I mean, that's what all.
Not burning bridges. All these things that have great applications in real life.
Other thing too is that, of course, Jana was talking about my experience working in games and how that was going to apply to film. The same thing's true with Jana, because Jana's daytime job has largely been working with marketing and trade shows. She understands logistics.
Yeah. I've worked corporate AV my whole life. I know exactly that.
And what is producing if not logistics?
Yeah, and early on, we ran into some snags when I would see everything that was on a call sheet for a day and say, sometimes it's hard to be the messenger, and I'd say, I don't see how we can get all this done. Right. And it turned out I was right, and later we got better and better at that. But I had never made a film, but I knew how much people and things could be moved around in one day, and also had an idea about the retakes and everything, and how everything takes longer than you think. And so, it was actually not bad preparation.
Building a trade show booth is not that different from the amount of time it takes to set up a set.
Exactly.
It's very, very similar. The discipline's the same.
And creative people are good problem solvers too. And that's another thing we can bring to whatever projects we do, whether it's creative stuff or stuff we're doing for a corporation or both. We tend to have to be able to solve problems, because there always has to be some kind of plan B or C, because things happen.
Yep, absolutely.
So I was going to say, as both of you have been in the creative life for such a long time, both of you lived in San Diego, how long have you guys been involved with Comic-Con and all the sci-fi? And
she's been involved with Comic-Con longer than I have.
Well, as I mentioned before, growing up with less exposure to a lot of popular culture, anything outside of books, than a lot of other people. It was fascinating for me. I first went to Comic-Con, and this is how old I am. I didn't make it to the El Cortez Hotel era, but I was it when it was in Golden Hall. I went as a student reporter from my college newspaper. And so back then, the dealer's floor had things like card tables with somebody's comic books and Burger King Star Wars glasses on it and stuff like that. I mean, it was a different con back then in a lot of ways. But when I met people in the professional group, that a very nice guy from a comics magazine showed me around and was explaining things to me. And, I'd noticed things like that there was a generation or two missing. I was saying, you've got very young people with very responsible positions and people that are past retirement age. What happened? And that's when he told me about the comic book scare and how a lot of people didn't go into comics for a long time because of the book Seduction of the Innocents that had come out, and all these people didn't want their kids to read comics. And so we've rebounded since then. But anyway,
all the other directions.
Yes, all the creativity though really made an impression on me. So I started wanting to go back. And then before I met Neal, I actually started being able to go on a ProPass because I had done some writing for the early days of the Sci-Fi Channel, back when they had more magazine format stuff, or they would do marathons of things. Yes, and I had, I guess copyrights or whatever, trademarks, but I had actually written a book, which unfortunately the publisher went under before it could go out. But I'd written a book about the original TV series Beauty and the Beast, the one with Ron Perlman and Linda Hamilton. Yes, and so
I love that show
because so I knew a lot about the literary references and things like that. The book was full of things like that. It was heavily end noted, and so they had me when they did a marathon with Ron Perlman. They had me do some writing for them, and then I also ended up doing some other writing for them about other stuff. So that got me my first ProPass for Comic-Con. And so later when Neal and I got together and got married, I told him that, he needed to get signed up for to go to Comic-Con, and he was asking how much it cost. And I said, no, you can go as a professional. And he was saying, well, wait a minute, I don't do comics. And I said, no, this covers popular culture. Trust me, your game credentials are great. So anyway, so that's what got Neal going.
And so those my first conventions. It's kind of funny because my first conventions were all out here on the West Coast. And of course, many years ago when I was in college, I actually helped run in a very minor capacity. I wasn't like con committee, but I used to help with a convention back home. And about 2 or 3 years ago, they started inviting me as a guest, which is kind of funny. They said, I got known on the West Coast before I came back here to my hometown convention.
The prophet is not without honor, except in his own country.
Exactly. Exactly. But anyway, they're wonderful people. It's SoonerCon back in Oklahoma City. And
in fact, I just had my first SoonerCon. We were just there.
You guys just got back from that.
Yeah. And another former SoonerCon person, and also from that same group, was Larry Nemechek, who is on both our panels that we have at Comic-Con this weekend. And I am the director of photography for his, I should say by now, our documentary that we've been shooting for 6 years.
Yeah, for as long as I know.
For as long as we know, and we maybe for as long as we continue to know each other. I don't know.
I think we're going to have an editing intervention if it doesn't come out soon.
I've been told there may be a third event for us at Comic-Con. I don't know if it's finished yet or not, but our editor theoretically is going to have some of the film ready for us to show at Comic-Con, but I don't know.
What is it about?
The Con of Wrath is a documentary about a Star Trek convention that went horribly wrong.
It was an early convention.
Early convention takes place 2 weeks after the release of The Wrath of Khan, and it was so bad that it basically
became legendary.
Basically what happened was so bad that it pretty much shut down fandom in Houston for almost 20 years.
I can't wait to see it.
Neither can I.
It's sort of like those disaster films of the 70s, only it's, look at what actually happened to it.
But no, it's a kind of a cool story because all the stuff that goes wrong, but it's also a story about how the people who are running the convention, the stars and the fans
and Paramount
kind of all the last minute come together and still manage to save this convention that's floundering horribly. But it's a story it's amazing. It's heartbreaking. It's crazy.
It's funny.
It's funny. And so I just don't know how we're going to cram this all into one film.
And it's real.
And it is real. It's 100% real. It absolutely happened. And how we even know about it is because this was Larry's first away from home convention when he was 19 years old. And so there's some of it that's told in his voice, talking about what happened, what he was doing, what his perception of everything was. But we've got interviews with the original con committee, or the ones that are still with us, with fans that attended. And then we also have interviews with Nichelle Nichols, Walter Koenig, George Takei, Harv Bennett, who was the executive producer of Wrath of Khan.
In his last interview.
And with Wendy Doohan. And we're still working on getting Shatner.
Yeah.
And maybe possibly, if we can get Tucker into it, Kirstie Alley, we'll see if those things happen.
Yeah.
But
I can't wait for you guys to finish.
But it's been crazy. We've been flying back and forth to Houston for 6 years now. And then we've also gone to Washington, to Seattle, to other parts of Texas, to Oklahoma. He picked up some people on the East Coast. So anyway, it's nuts. We've got like 70 hours of footage.
So if that comes through, you're going to have a very busy con, because you have the Uncharted Regions, and then you guys have a panel together, which is happening on Thursday.
I want to say this before we. So you asked a couple months ago if anybody on the intellectuals would be interested in being on a panel, to which I saw the message on my phone and I about crapped myself. Because 5 years ago when I started the podcast, we made a bucket list. Like, these are the things we hope we can do on the show. These are the things we hope the show will lead to. Mm-hmm. One of the very first 5 things on that list is be on a panel at Comic-Con. So I want to say thank you from the deepest recesses of my cold heart for helping make that happen.
I am more than happy. Amazing. I am more than happy to do that, because honestly, dude, it's just like one of the things the things we talked about before is that for the most part, we keep a fairly low profile in the film community. You're one of the few local people who pay any attention to us. We have always appreciated that, and so we had this opportunity. We had a podcasting panel, and we did this panel last year, but with a totally different lineup. Mm-hmm. And I really debated about whether we were going to bring the same people back, and they were wonderful. They're all friends of mine, love all of them. But I said, you know what? I have a lot of friends that do this, that are into podcasts and everything. And I said, hey, I want to turn around and give it some new voices and some other people to kind of come on. And so I'm really proud of the fact that over the years, Jane and I have given a lot of people their first Comic-Con panel. And that's the kind of thing that is really one of the most satisfying things about things we do with our little place in the creative community. Everything from a couple of the young actors in a previous episode of that were in Someday Over You, that was their first paid roles. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but they got, they were thrilled that they got paid and that they got fed and everything while they were working. And that was so fun. And we sponsored the Mobile International Film Festival, and seeing people who had never seen their work on a big screen before enjoy seeing that was really fun. So anything we can do to help people cross up something from a bucket list or make some kind of dream come true, that is one of the best things ever, as far as I'm concerned. That's just important to us. And because the thing about it is that the independent creator community is still in a lot of respects fairly small. Mm-hmm. And so if we can help each other. We don't have a podcast, but we like doing it from time to time. Can we help you make something happen? We're happy to do it. And so anyway, I was just really glad that we were able to have you aboard with us this year. So thank you very much. Heroes at the Mic is Thursday at 1. Thursday at 1. At the library. And so which is not difficult to get to.
Look for the big silver Easter egg. It's a big silver Easter egg. You can't miss it. It's kind of near Petco Park. Yeah.
Okay.
I really feel like we need to have special, like, Comic-Con exclusive items that are only available over there, so people will come over to us because they act like it's the end of the earth. He goes, it's the same distance as the Marriott. But I guess it's because, we don't have alcohol in beds. But anyway, so
maybe the fact that they're closing down Harbor this year will help.
I'm hoping
entice
so.
People to actually cross the street.
I'm hoping so, and I think that more. I'm really excited about the fact that at least for our for the Uncharted panel, 2 hours before us, they finally are going to premiere the first episode of Space Command. So I'm hoping that we can, because we're going to stick our poster over here up so that people coming out said there's going to be another event in a couple hours. But I think they're starting to have more people do stuff over there, and I'm hoping that some of the bigger name folks, things going on over there, that'll draw some more awareness to the library, because it's a really nice venue. I don't know. Have you been?
I've seen photos of it and stuff. I've never actually set foot in it, but I've heard nothing but great things about our library.
It's what the Neal Morgan auditorium. It's maybe 250 seats. It's probably comparable to the MOPA actually. But it's really nice, and we've been there for we're there last year, and I really like it as a place. It's and it's a great place to have audio stuff. It's because it's very acoustically built and all this wonderful stuff. But anyhow. So our panel topic for Heroes of the Mic, just for the audience, is that we're going to be talking about, there are a lot of people who are interested in podcasts, how they work and everything else. And even though Uncharted Regions itself is not at the moment a podcast, it might eventually become a podcast. We're shooting for broadcast first and then podcast maybe. So we started doing this last year, and we had a wonderful group of people. But what we're shooting for is people who are interested in podcasting, and have you guys come in and talk about how do you run your show? What are the ins and outs? What was the hardest thing that you've had to do? What were the easy things to do? What are the unexpected things that you didn't know were going to work? How do you get your guests? How do you promote your show?
Right.
And so it's just the nuts and bolts of running a podcast, and also too is nobody in this podcast or nobody on this panel has a hard time talking. The difficulty is going to be getting everybody to shut up long enough to let other people talk. But that's what Heroes of the Mic is going to be about. And I'll go hit that button once again. It's going to be on Thursday, 1:00, Neal Morgan Auditorium, San Diego Public Library. We're like 10-minute walk from the pedestrian bridge at the end of Harbor.
Yeah, if you take the pedestrian bridge across, you're dropped right down next to the parking lot where they put all the food trucks.
Right.
And Petco Park on the left. You just keep walking straight down, and it's just past Petco Park.
And the building's impossible to miss because it looks like a gigantic egg.
Yeah, it's a cool building.
Yeah, it's a really cool looking building.
But very distinctive. There's no mistaking it for one of the others.
So I'll just run to the lineup here for that particular panel. Is again, we're going to have myself as the moderator and yourself and this wonderful podcast here. We also have Larry Nemechek coming to talk about the Trek Files, and so they talk about all things Trek. We're going to have Susie Botello, who is the organizer for the San Diego Mobile International Film Festival. With look for mobile without an E. It's MOBIL because she wanted to trademark it. Which is again her podcast talking about people who are making films with their phones, which is pretty cool. We sponsor.
It'll be interesting to talk to her because. The film that I won Best Director at the Film Awards, we shot like 40% of that with the iPhone.
Oh, good. Well, that's really cool.
So it was a mixture of DSLRs and iPhones.
Well, that's really cool.
It'll be fun to talk to her.
But if you want to enter professionally, you have to do it 100%, unfortunately. Unless you're doing some drone footage. She's allowing in 10% drone footage. But anyway, she's talking about people who are working for their films, who are working on phones shot. I can't talk tonight.
Film shot on phones?
Films shot on phones. Then we also have Chris Trav, who's from MTR Network.
Yes, and he's Dark Vader on Twitter, I believe. Some people may know him from that.
And so, but he, has basically a website and podcast talking about all things geeky. We have Molly Maglino. I hope I'm saying her name correctly. But she actually has been doing a video kind of series or whatever. And I think she's been talking about moving into doing maybe some audio stuff as well. And so she's going to be kind of talking about, what she's going to be looking to do to move between just doing, because I think she's, thinking about the fact that there are differences between the audiences, and it's much easier I think in some respects for podcasters, because this is something, and one of the reasons we were talking about doing Uncharted Regions is that this is something that you can pop a tape in your car. Oh my God, what century is this? But a CD or an MP3 or whatever you can stream, and you can have this experience while you're driving down the road. It doesn't require the same kind of
the commitment's different.
The commitment is different, and it's easier to ease into that than to sitting down and watch a film or whatever.
Yeah, it's like I know a lot of people who listen to our show. They do it while they're like doing their jog or while they're gardening.
Right. Right.
I listen to most of the podcasts that I listen to while I'm driving.
It makes sense, because how many people, when they're by themselves at home, just turn on a TV almost for company? So if you can have something more, and you're not missing anything visually, if it's an audio cast, then you can garden, you can do housework, you can fold laundry, whatever, and it makes life easier.
I'm missing anyone? So me, you, Larry, Susie, Malia, Chris. No, that's everybody. And so that's going to be a lineup for Thursday. And again, I hope that folks who are coming to Comic-Con will sweep in and check us out, because we have just an amazing group of folks there, all kinds of different shows, all kinds of different energy. And I think that we're going to get a lot of great advice from people, because it's going to be people who've been just doing it to someone who's just starting the process of doing this. And that's something we actually try to do whenever we do a panel, is hear people who are super experienced or new people, because you're going to get different different.
Well, and everybody's
advice.
Approach to it is different.
Place.
Everybody's expectations of what they're getting out of it is different. So I think it's good to hear a good wide range of the experience.
And a newer person in any given field can often be encouraging to people that are thinking about it, because they think, oh, well then this is what I need to do to be that person, and then the other ones show how you move further along with it.
If you have a panel about acting, it's much more difficult if you've got, Sir Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart and all your people on the panel are like that, and you're an actor that's just getting started. You go, this is inspirational, but where's the guy that's just a little bit ahead of me?
You don't see the stepping stone.
You don't see the stepping stone. So where's the guy that's just a little bit ahead of me that I can get some advice from them that helps me get to the next level?
Well, that's always been the approach of my podcast, right? Like I interview people like GIGI, and then I interview people like me. And you get the mixture of both, people who are up and coming in their careers, people who are at the peak of their careers, some people who are on the tail end of their careers. I think it's helpful to hear from all
thank you for having us here.
It is, because I think helping people build that bridge from where they are now to where they want to be. No matter where somebody is in life, there's usually things they still want to accomplish. And so having people that can fill that gap and say, these are some of the steps along the way that will get you further to where you want to be.
Yeah. Well, and I find myself as an experienced person in the things that I do, sometimes hearing the perspective of somebody who's kind of coming up behind me reinvigorates me and reminds me of where I came from, and kind of lights the fire, because I'm like, oh God, someone's coming up behind me.
Well, and I think there is definitely that aspect of is that sometimes, you get jaded about what you're doing. You take for granted the things that are awesome about what's going on with you, and you kind of forget what it's like not to have been there, and whatever. And you get people who are younger or just less experienced than you are, whatever you're doing, and you hear them, and you get that energy, and you get excited about what you're doing again. And so I think that's really as important. I think it's important for both sides of that equation.
Yeah.
Because the people who are trying to learn more and find out, and for the people who said, hey, I need someone to kind of light a fire under my ass again, and feel that kind of excitement again.
Well, I'll have to confess, I'm at a point right now where I needed someone to light a fire under my ass for this podcast, because I've got some things have been crazy for the intellectuals since the beginning of the year. I've mentioned it a couple of times, but since the middle of January, I've only been in San Diego about
you've been gone
34 days.
Never in this state.
I'm never here, so it's been really hard for us to kind of stay on topic, keeping the show going and whatnot. but it's always on the back of my mind. It's like, oh, I haven't put a show out in a few weeks. Like, so because for 5 years, I was really good about at least once a week, every week.
Yeah.
So the last 6 months has been really kind of painful. It's kind of like, ugh.
Well, the hard part of being at working is it working.
I do that with my personal blog. I have to put something out the first of every month. And it's good exercise because, I end up with things like where, sometimes the computer's not cooperating and something I want to post isn't posting and all that. And I get to put up with all the frustrations of trying to put something out on time, but I do it. And I think sometimes self-imposed things like that have helped me a bit. It's like, okay, I've got to put something out. And
that's the way it was when I started the show. The whole goal of the first year was just to put one show out every week and not miss
That's a lot, though. Once a week is a lot.
52 shows in the year. It's a lot of shows. But I stayed on it, and like I said, we kept at that for a long time. But in the period where you guys were on the show the last time, like we were doing 2 shows a week. On the release schedule.
That's a lot.
And we were recording them in like these crazy sessions where we sat down and recorded for like 5 days straight, 3 or 4 interviews a day, and that was how I was able to combat being on the road and doing whatever.
Because you had backlog.
This backlog of interviews. But I started to have difficulty with that because I'm like, oh, I interviewed these people like 4 months ago. I don't know how.
That's pretty gross.
Timely is this now, right?
Right. So then,
this guy's dead.
So we're trying to, so we're trying to find the balance now. Right. But I think that'll be one of those interesting things. Hopefully, I can touch on that during the panel. Like, your expectations of your show can change too over time.
Right.
Is anybody taping the panel?
No, we're not taping the panel because unfortunately, from the Comic-Con, you've got to get permission to have your panels taped. Now, that's if you set up something on a tripod and have sticks and what have you. If somebody else whips out a cell phone, I won't notice it. So Susie will go. He
was making a thumbs up gesture for the audio.
Susie's gonna be hopping out. Send it to my podcast. But anyway.
But to get the best audio quality, be there at the panel.
Yeah, that's the way to get the absolute best is to actually be there. And also you can ask questions, which you can't do if you're just listening to the show.
Right.
You can ask questions, but we're not going to hear them, so we can't answer them. So that's sad.
On a podcast, no one can hear you ask.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it. I gotta figure out what I'm gonna wear though.
Jedi outfit. No?
Totally. Commit, man.
I went to Comic-Con in my Jedi outfit last year.
See how hot it is and go from there. Have a backup outfit.
It was really hot the day I wore the outfit. It was like 97
So
degrees.
for the poor folks who are not in San Diego this week and won't get to come to Comic-Con or your panel, if there is someone out there that is interested in doing what you guys do, is there someplace like a Twitter that they can be like, hey, I got this question?
No, we only transmit like questions by donkey. This is you handed. No.
I reach people telepathically.
Yeah, telepathically, right. But no. If you want to find out more, so we'll kind of hop back to the other thing first. Is that if you want to find out more about Uncharted Regions, and so of course there's several ways to get a hold of us that way. But the easiest way is we are on Facebook. We have a Facebook page which is just Uncharted Region. We have 3 people monitoring the messages for that particular board. So usually your fastest responses would be messages on our Uncharted Regions page on Facebook. We have a Twitter, but on Twitter we're at Uncharted Region singular because Twitter doesn't like more than 14 characters, and so we're stuck with Uncharted Region. So there's only one region that's Uncharted on Twitter. Of course we have just a regular website that is horrendously out of date, but it's pretty. And you can go to an Uncharted Region website to find out a little bit more about who is behind the show. Even though Jana and I are the executive producers and we run the show and we'll be writing the majority of the episodes for this first season, we actually have other writers that are involved. We have, we'd mentioned before, Harris Orkin, who is a game writer. He's probably best known for Call of Juarez, and he was on, want to say one of the Command and Conquerors, but he's had several really cool things that he worked on. Then we have my buddy Jeff Thorne, who was actually one of the producers on Leverage and also in The Librarians. And right now he is the showrunner on Marvel's animated Black Panther series.
Oh, nice.
And
very hardworking writer. That guy works all
amazing.
the time.
And so he's going to be writing an episode for us. We got a great guy who's done a lot of stuff in comics. That's won a lot of awards, Hannibal Taboo. He's written an episode for us. We have a young lady, who's of course Jana, like I said we were both writing episodes, but
some of them are mine. All mine.
Yes, they're all yours. My friend Jimmy Diggs that I mentioned before is that we kind of pitched the idea of having him write something for us, and he's crazy busy because he's working on something of his own.
So we're going to write it. Yeah.
There's a story that about whenever he was growing up as a kid in Detroit in the 60s, he had some really kind of unique childhood experiences that were kind of saying that's really cool, and we're going to take it a step to the right into the Twilight Zone or into the Uncharted Regions.
So Neal and I will work a lot on that, but we'll collaborate with him to make sure it sounds right for recreating, some scene from that's based on his childhood memory of his. And that one's going to be really charming. That's going to be one of those.
That's our season closer.
The Uncharted episodes will run the whole gamut from horror. Harris's episode is like a Western with a horror twist. We will have some that are funny, some that are sad. So they're going to be like the beauty of an anthology series is you can go everywhere. You can go everywhere, but all of them will have that some kind of twist, something that's weird, something that's unexplained or weird in it. And so that's the common thread.
That's great.
And so, but anyway, so we have some writers. We have, and also on the casting front of things, we have just made a really exciting cast thing that I'll tell you whenever we're not online, because we're going to make that announcement at Comic-Con. Mm-hmm. But we're super jazz excited about. And we're going to be reaching out for other episodes, looking for maybe a handful of other actors. And not every episode is going to have some big name actor in it or what have you, but we want a few because number one is we do ultimately want to try to get this series somewhere beyond. Our original plan is to get broadcast. That's what we want. We taped our first episode at KPPS thanks to Beth Accomando. She got us in and we taped our first episode there. For our other episodes, we've been going to other studios to get stuff done. But ultimately, we want to end up on NPR and have them broadcast nationally. For the first thing what will happen is first, if we can talk the local PBS affiliate to run the season, and then if that goes well and we get a good response, maybe they'll then turn around and help us get to the next level. That's what we hope.
Or other affiliates will pick up as well.
Yeah. I already have Krypton Radio, who is an online science fiction station. They've already kind of flipped over backwards and said, we want your series. We want your series. We want your series. We want your series. And so, one of the other options is looking at something like iTunes, Audible, something like that.
Right.
Because as much fun as much as we love this, is that it has cost a minor fortune for us to produce. And so I want to at least pay for season 2.
Right.
I'm not looking to get rich at this because these are audio dramas. I'm
modest
expectations. But if I can pay for season 2, I'm happy camper. Anyway, there was a point to all of that before I got started on it. I don't know.
How people can contact you.
How people can contact me. Right.
Thank you.
So like I said, Facebook, Twitter, that we're there. We have a website, just unchartedregions.com. Also, Jane and I both have Facebook and Twitters. So I'm at Nealios on Twitter, or just Neal Hallford on Facebook. She's Jana Hallford. And are you also Jana Hallford on Twitter as well?
Yes.
So hers is easier. I put my old nickname on there, but and then of course this is all under our production company, Swords and Circuitry Studios,
right. And
you can find our Twitter, Facebook, all that stuff that's out there. And so anyway, one of the things that right now, as we're getting scripts done and turned in and kind of prep for production, we announce all of our casting audition stuff on our Uncharted Regions Facebook page. And generally speaking, what we do is we will give you a set of sides. So for those of you who aren't really experienced with this sort of thing, is sides are just a handful of pages, 2 or 3 pages from your characters that's pulled out of the script. Is basically kind of the central core of what we're looking for that character. And you look at the sides and you get your friend to tape you or your self-tape or what have you, but you give a version of your performance. And again, we're looking at your voice and not at your face. I don't care what you look like. You could be a Vogon for all it matters, as long as we hear the performance we're looking for. That's all that matters to us. And so it's the thing that I think most people aren't really super conscious of. A lot of actors today are very focused on what they look like.
Yeah.
And I said, for us, the only thing that matters is sell me on what's between my ears. Yeah. What I can hear.
Do you have a preference of audio files over video files?
In some respect, even though people have sent us video files, what I do is I turn the screen around before I even play it, so I don't even see them. Because I don't want to get distracted, honestly, because I might see someone and go, here's a very attractive person, but I don't want it to take away from what I'm hearing, because that has the attractive part of it, I'm not going to get any of that. It has no bearing on the part, and the only thing that matters is what do I actually get from the audio side.
I also want to mention that if people do audition for a part and don't get it, don't be discouraged. Please keep watching for the call sheets, because I don't know how many times we've heard someone and said, wow, they're not quite right for this, but we have this other thing coming. We hope they come back. And so, and some of the really fine actors we know locally, they understand. Most of them have been doing it for a while, and they say, we're going to get one of these eventually. And it's true.
It's been hard. We've had some local actors that are really awesome. That I've had to reject. And it's not because they're not good actors or whatever, because it just doesn't sound right. I'm not hearing what I need to hear. And the thing about it is, they may not be right in this role, and they be amazing in another one. And so
some of the women that auditioned for Someday Over You for the vocal part, they sang like Broadway show people, but what we needed was more of a bluesy torch singer type, from the past. And so, but we made notes. Wow, some people can really belt it out. And if we have something that needs, that kind of singer, then we'll have them. So yes, I don't think effort's not really wasted creatively. If they apply for something and don't get it.
I tell people that all the time, like any one audition you do could lead to something unforeseen down the way.
Oh, yeah. And so I definitely have other people that I have kind of in my hip pocket in terms of, I really like what they did in this audition, and I might come back and use something like that for this script down the road. And so again, don't give up on us. Keep on, pitching us and letting us know, that you are interested, and B, that you're available and all that kind of stuff. And so, but it's, and that's, I think the hardest thing is being creative, because you never want to say no.
Right.
Because I think what a lot of people who aren't on the producer side of the field think that, we're just all terrible, horrible people or whatever it says. I want every audition that comes in my mailbox to be the right part. I want to hear someone show up and give me something amazing that just makes me go, oh, wow, this is, I want to leap out of my chair. This is fantastic.
Right.
And so I want everybody to have that great part. And so that's what we're looking for. And so, and like I say, sometimes it's not a matter of the quality, it's just the fact it's not a fit.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's hard to be an adult and say no.
And it's actually a relief when we get to, pretty equal auditions, because more than once there's been a scheduling issue where we've had to go more by who was available when than, if
who was necessarily the better one.
Yeah, because if you had two that were great and then one person could be there, then great. And then the other one, well, maybe we'll have something for them later.
The one thing that we have is we don't have a crazy schedule thing to deal with, because we don't have a signed distribution deal. We don't have a date when these are going to air. So we do have a little bit of latitude in terms of, this has to be done on this date, other than I have to have this done by Friday so I can play it. But beyond these sort of little events that we've been doing, we don't really have a hard and fast date. And so the advantage is that I can tune and tweak and do whatever until I decide this is done. It's ready. And then whenever we have all 13, we can go to somebody and say, here, let's do something. But the downside of that is that there's a danger of, you know what it's like.
Right.
No film, no creative thing is ever really done.
No.
It is only, this is the point at which I will stop screwing with it and I will just push it over the wall so I can do the next thing.
My brother-in-law always says, you're never truly finished with anything creative. You just abandon it.
You abandon it, yeah. And there's some point, because the thing about it is you can't start on the next thing until you stop doing this.
Yeah.
And
it's hard because we're all obsessive people.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to be at least a little bit OCD, or as I say, CDO, which is the same thing, but it's properly alphabetized. When it comes to, you know, and I'm glad that like Neal's very picky about the audio and making sure, you know, that actors sound like they're in the space. You know, when you're doing a film, you have people in pretty much the spatial relationships they're supposed to have.
Unless you're ADR.
If you have
a lot of people can't do ADR well.
If you have people that are recording something in a studio, then you have to set up the voices in such a way that they sound like they're actually standing where they're supposed to be in this fictional world you've created. So there's a lot of interesting things that come up.
All the tiny little things that you take for granted in a film. You know, I'm standing there and he moves around and I hear your feet, you know, scraping on whatever. And so granted, there's a certain degree that you're going in, you're adding Foley to what's going on. But all of that stuff of like, you know, they're walking over dirt and they're going over here and your mic is picking that stuff up. You know, with this, the only world that exists is the stuff that I manually put in. Mm-hmm. So every tiny little bit
it's much more akin to doing the audio for an animated film.
Yeah, exactly. And so it doesn't exist unless I put it in. And so there's just insane amount of time that's just sitting there. Okay, boot scrape here. Okay, wind picks up here, you know, and all of this crazy stuff because I have to create the world in which those actors are inhabiting. Mm-hmm. And it's very labor intensive.
It's an orchestra of sound.
It is.
Do you do any of the sounds on set? Like, do you have a sound person on?
No, man, because the thing about it is that it would slow it down to get the sound just in the right place. And I think for us is that it's not like, you know, what was it? Companion, you know, where they're doing all the, you know, I've got the
here comes a horse, or here comes a horse, so we're gonna do.
My brother-in-law did all that on Ed Asner radio drama a number of years back.
That's good if you're doing something that's humorous, but
it sounds really cheesy.
This is supposed to be a movie for the ears.
Yeah, so and that's been our thing, and so and that's exactly the way I treat it. Is that this is a movie? We go in, we get the dialogue down, and I treat that the same way that I do a film shot. And say, how close are they to the camera? Where are they moving to and from?
Are they running?
I capture all that stuff, you know, in the studio. Sometimes I'll do some modification where they're moving across the sound field or what have you, because, you know, there's limitations to what you can do inside a booth.
Right.
But I do all the basic, the really simple, you know, movement stuff inside the studio, but everything else is artificially created. So I'm just sitting there with libraries and pulling stuff down. I spent a ridiculous amount of time listening to footsteps. Okay, footsteps on rocks, footsteps in mud, footsteps in leaves, footsteps in, you know, and what's appropriate here.
When it gets funny too, it's like, okay, we need a couple of horses. Well, here's a whole herd of them. Here's a stampede. No, we just no.
It's never quite exactly
here's
what
one.
I'm looking for.
Yeah,
I need three.
Yeah,
it's one and it's galloping instead of walking.
Yeah, and so you do all this kind of, you know, futzing around with values and stuff. But anyhow. So yeah. And there was a start to that thread, and it's gone because I'm old.
Well, like I said, having listened to the first episode, it's fantastic the work that you guys are doing, and I strongly recommend everybody checks out Uncharted Regions.
I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say we were just getting warmed up with episode 1.
I can imagine.
I am so proud of this episode that we're going to play on Friday. It was just the performances are all great, and they were all great in the first one, but I've had a lot more time to kind of figure out what Uncharted Regions is since we got started last fall.
That's great, and it should evolve as you go.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
And this one, I have to admit, was really intimidating because in the first one, I wrote one song, for it, and I was pretty much done. For this one, I'm doing all the score for it, and it's orchestral. And it has scared the bejesus out of me, but at the same time, it's been really exciting to kind of let all that stuff out of the box.
And so we get to hear it this Friday.
You get to hear it this Friday.
I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I'm hoping it'll all be there because I have all. Well, you'll definitely get to hear the episode, the entire episode in terms of the dialogue and the sound effects are all there.
It might not be the full final mix.
It's the I'm still working because I have all of the score done except for the final scene.
Well, I think we need to stop podcasting so you can get your aspect to work.
Sorry, you're right. Yes. So I can get that music for that last scene. But anyway, I've been really pleased with how it's come together.
That's
great. It's going to be fun having it there at Comic-Con and giving everybody else an opportunity to hear what we do.
I think it's a good venue for it.
Yeah, I think it is too. And like I say, that auditorium is really nice. It's actually a little bit better than some of the other places that we have been to or whatever. And so I'm looking forward to hearing it in the Neal Morgan Auditorium.
Awesome. Neal, Jana.
Oh,
thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you guys for coming down and letting us yak at it.
Yeah, that was our pleasure.
And I'm looking forward to being on the panel with you on Thursday.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be fun.
Go check it out, people.
Thank you.
Hello there, citizens. I am the terror that flaps in the night. I am the floaty that will not flush no matter how many times you try in the toilet bowl of crime. I am Darkwing Duck, telling you please, talk hard and enjoy the mindgasm. Whatever the heck that means. After all, you are watching Intellectual Podcast with your ears.